Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to do my review of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I just got a chance to see it last night, and I wanted to come on and give you my thoughts. So I'm not going to do an overly detailed breakdown, but the basic plot is this. T'Challa passes away off screen at the beginning of the movie from some type of illness, despite his sister Shuri's best efforts to save him. Of course, part of the reason she's unable to save him is because the heart-shaped herb no longer exists, since Killmonger destroyed the whole crop previously. After he dies, they fast forward a year, and we find out that the world is trying to get a hold of vibranium, either buying it through governments, by stealing it, or finding it outside of Wakanda. We interrupt this breakdown and review for the following message. Hey, you, right there. I see you reaching to click out of this video. You're only like 2 minutes in, if that. Stop it. Watch the rest of the video. And if you can't watch the rest of the video, just watch a little bit more, will ya? Maybe get to the halfway point. I'm getting views on my channel, but everybody's bailing in the first minute of the video. I mean, I know I'm not much to look at, but I'm not that ugly. So stop it. Keep watching the video. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel, for crying out loud. Okay, now back to the video. We now return you to the video in progress. The Wakandas, of course, don't know that there is vibranium outside of Wakanda, which they find out early in the film, much to their dismay, because they're afraid of what happens if the outside world gets a hold of it and can weaponize it. One of Queen Ramonda's specific concerns about the situation is that they don't have a Black Panther to protect Wakanda anymore from those who would attempt to steal it, or from anyone who gets a hold of any of it by any other means, because the heart-shaped herb no longer exists. And she urges Shuri to try to reconstitute it, but Shuri doesn't want to do that because she feels like the Black Panther is the past and that it died with her brother. Now, as part of an effort to find vibranium outside of Wakanda, an American team looking for some in the ocean catches the attention of Namor, who resides over a kingdom of his own underwater that is also rich with vibranium. He doesn't want other people getting it either, because he's afraid that if people get a hold of it, they'll come for his kingdom. So he's kind of in the same position as the Wakandans. Somehow he finds out that the reason that the people looking for it in the ocean were able to find some or even look for it is that they have a machine that detects vibranium, which was made by a particular scientist. So he goes to Queen Ramonda and asks her to see to it that this scientist is brought to him, presumably because he wants to kill them, to keep them from, I'm not really sure what. They've already made the machine and already turned it over to a government. So like, what does he hope to accomplish by getting the scientist? I don't know, but that's his goal. And so Ramonda sends Okoye, who takes Shuri with her, to Boston to find the scientist, who turns out to be Riri Williams, who in the comics is Ironheart, the successor of sorts to Iron Man. While trying to bring her to Wakanda to keep her safe, or to turn her over to Namor, we're not really sure what they're going to do, she ends up being abducted by Namor's people. And when this occurs, Shuri decides to go with Namor's people to the underwater kingdom. So she spends some time there. She's told Namor's story. She is asked by him to ally with him so that they can fend off the rest of the world that's trying to find vibranium, and that might attack either or both of them. And she doesn't really want to go along with that because he also wants to still kill Riri, and she doesn't want that to happen. So she disagrees with him. Now, all this time, Ramonda is trying to find Shuri, and she turns to the Lupita Nyong'o character, who is a Wakandan agent, and she rescues Shuri, which pisses off Namor, and he attacks Wakanda, and Queen Ramonda ends up dying protecting Riri. After that, Shuri decides to try to reconstruct the heart-shaped herb, and she does so using, interestingly enough, some material from a bracelet that Namor gave her, which contained some material that came from vibranium-rich soil. she, of course, is able to recreate it. She then consumes the elixir that comes from it and gains the strength of a Black Panther and assumes the mantle of Black Panther, and then goes on the offensive against Namor and his people, ultimately winning and entering into an agreement with Namor to form an alliance as he originally wanted. In a mid-credits scene, we see that the Lupita Nyong'o character had a son with T'Challa before he passed, whose name is T'Challa, although he goes by Toussaint. And that's pretty much the plot. And if it seems like I didn't leave out stuff and that I did, in fact, do a detailed breakdown, no, I left a lot of stuff out because this movie is long and there's a lot of stuff in it that surrounds the stuff I just detailed. So, anyway, that's the basic plot. Now, what did I think of the movie? I really liked it. I enjoyed the movie a lot. The performances are just top notch by Angela Bassett, the actress who plays Okoye, and Lupita Nyong'o, and the guy who plays the ruler of the sort of mountain area, the mountain tribes of Wakanda, and even the guy who plays Namor did a good job. The whole film is visually stunning, not just in a special effects way, which of course it is stunning in that way, but the costumes are unbelievable. The sets are unbelievable. The landscapes are unbelievable, although a lot of those are probably special effects even above water. And of course, the underwater sequences are crazy awesome looking, but that's again special effects. But it's just a visually stunning film. The soundtrack is incredible. And I think the story is really good. It's a two-pronged story. It's a story of two reclusive nations, one that isn't known at all to the outside world and one that only recently is, and how they react to the threat of the world at large getting a hold of a material that they have dominion over, which they know could be used against them, and which it seems some people are determined to acquire and use against not only them, but everyone, as well as being a story about grief on a personal, familial level, grief on a national level, a sense of rudderlessness that comes from being in a position they've not been in for a long time, namely not having their protector anymore of the Black Panther. And I think one of those stories is more interesting than the other. I think the story of the Wakandans and, more importantly, T'Challa's family dealing with his loss and the loss subsequently of Queen Ramonda is very poignant and very powerful. I think the story of the two nations worrying about what happens if everybody else gets a hold of vibranium is interesting, but it's also kind of boilerplate. It's not very exciting. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is an interesting development and an interesting pickle that these people are in. So, I thought on a story level that it was good. Now, that having been said, I think there are some aspects of it that didn't work. I think that it's too long and that as a result, parts of it drag. And this could have been solved by taking out some of the scenes. There's a whole scene where the queen strips Okoye of her rank and status in the kingdom after Shuri is taken away under her watch, after the queen had requested that Shuri not go, that she not take Shuri with her. And I understand it. It makes complete sense that the queen would be upset and that the queen would do this. And it's a powerful moment in the film for the two characters. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't need to be in the film. We don't need to see that. It doesn't need to occur. It could have been taken out. And if the film were shorter than it was with that scene in it, I would have said keep it because it's a good scene. But because the film is so long with that scene in it, I think they could have taken it out and it wouldn't have affected the story. I think the scenes surrounding the initial meetup with Riri Williams were kind of too long. One of them is an action sequence, so I know why they kept that in. They want to have action sequences in the film, so that I understand, and that's fine. But part of it was also not an action sequence, and I think it was a little too long. It could have been trimmed, and it could have been more succinct, and it could have taken some of that runtime of the film off and shortened the length of time between important scenes, that surround these unimportant kind of moments. There's also an entire sort of subplot. I say sort of because it doesn't really go anywhere, but there's a sort of subplot running through the film involving the CIA character Ross, played by Martin Freeman, who we saw in Black Panther, and his, I guess now ex-wife, the Julia Louis-Dreyfus character, who runs the CIA that we saw Falcon and the Winter Soldier, as well as Black Widow. And it's completely useless. It's a completely useless subplot that doesn't go anywhere, that isn't integral to the story in any way. Nothing in the film hinges on anything that takes place in those scenes. Those scenes are there as sort of, it's not filler, but it's background information that I think was meant to heighten the tension in the film, because it sort of goes over how other nations are reacting to the events of the film, where, for example, the vibranium seeking operation that gets attacked, which the US blames on Wakanda because they don't know about the existence of Namor. And it doesn't really do that. It doesn't really heighten that tension, because at no time does the United States actually move to do anything to Wakanda. There's a lot of talk about it. And like I said, I think you're supposed to get from that, oh gosh, now not only are the Wakandans going to have to deal with Namor and his people, they're going to have to deal with an attack from the United States or the United States and some of its allies. And they're going to be fighting a battle on two fronts. But that never happens. If it had happened, it would have been fine that they showed you what led up to it and how Ross tried to prevent it, which he kind of does. He, cautions against things like that in the story when it comes up that the government might want to do that. But because it never even gets close to happening, it's completely pointless to have these scenes in the film. The story is not at all impacted by those scenes, and they easily could have taken them out. Why they put them in there, I really don't know. I think one quick scene, including this character, had to be in there because it's how the Wakandans learn where Riri is, but that's like a 5-second scene. And there are other scenes with that character and Julie Louis-Dreyfus and various other diplomats and whatnot, but those scenes were completely unnecessary, and they added to the length of the film and made it kind of drag. There's a scene where Queen Ramondo has to go and sort of retrieve the Lupita Nyong'o character because she leaves Wakanda after the blip and goes to Haiti. And it's a cool scene, and I enjoyed seeing the actresses act out the scene and all of that, but it's unnecessary in the film. All they had to do was have a moment where the queen says, get me the Lupita Nyong'o character, contact the Lupita Nyong'o character and get her here. That's all they had to say to get that character in the film. So the fact that they did a whole scene that takes up a couple of minutes versus a couple of seconds, where the queen goes and recruits her personally, not by Zoom, not on the phone, just goes there, was unnecessary and added to the length of the film, which, like I said, makes it drag. So I didn't like those scenes and that aspect of the film. Now, by no means am I saying that these things make the film boring. They do not. The reason they don't, in my mind, is because they're all meaningful scenes in and of themselves, even though they don't impact the rest of the story, even though they're not meaningful to the overarching story. These scenes that I'm talking about, the one between the queen and the Lupita Nyong'o character, the scene where Okoye is stripped of her rank, they aren't boring scenes in and of themselves. And I think the through line of the film, specifically the grief plot, has a beginning and an end, if not a middle. And watching that story unfold is not, on the whole, boring. There are action sequences peppered throughout the film, which are fantastic. So I don't think between those two things that you can say the film on the whole is boring. Are there parts of the story that are slow in nature, slow in pacing? Yes, but the acting is fantastic. The emotions and human condition elements that are explored in those scenes are engaging. So I don't think you can say the film is boring. Not every movie is Deadpool with punchy dialogue and, a whiz bang kind of storytelling approach. And films that aren't that are not boring because they aren't that. Not being that doesn't make them automatically boring. If the content of slowed down scenes or slowed down storytelling is not engaging, then yes, you could say that a film containing those scenes is boring, but that's not the case with these scenes that I'm talking about. So I don't think it's fair to call the scenes, or to call the movie rather, boring. It's engaging if you're someone who can engage with intellectual content or engage emotionally with heavy content. If you're not such a person, then yeah, you're going to find it boring. But the fault is with you, not the film. I do have one other criticism. I think it took way too long to get to the Black Panther part of Black Panther. The Black Panther suit doesn't get worn by Shuri until the end of the movie. And I think that was a mistake. I think it should have happened much sooner. That would have necessitated that the overall story were a little different. And I think the film would have benefited from that. I'm all about the human drama. And frankly, if there hadn't been any Black Panther in the movie, I still would have enjoyed it for the story that it was quite a bit. But I also did want to see the Black Panther. And there's no Black Panther until right up to the end, pretty much. And I thought that that wasn't the best thing. And I think it would have helped the movie not be criticized to the extent it's being criticized in some corners if the actual Black Panther had been in the damn movie a little bit more. But overall, I liked this film. I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. I would say go see it. It's very enjoyable, especially if you're someone who enjoys stories about the human condition. And I would say don't listen to the haters. Some of them are saying not only that it's boring, but they're saying that it's overly female centric and that that's not good. It is overly female centric, but there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It does not detract in any way from the quality of the film. It's just as good of a film as if it were all about men. There's no difference. So don't listen to anyone who says that. The other thing I would say is going into it, don't confuse the heavy memorialization of T'Challa in this film for memorialization of Chadwick Boseman that's deliberately done to pad the film or ground it. The memorialization that's meant to ground this film and make it meaningful is the memorialization of T'Challa, not the memorialization of Chadwick Boseman, though one does serve as the other at the same time. The former does, in fact, serve as the latter at the same time. But it would be the same movie if the actor hadn't died and only the character had died. And telling the story of how the character's death impacted the other characters is the underpinning of the film. It also happens to be that the actor passed away and that he's being grieved by the cast and crew and the fans. And, the film does memorialize him simultaneously. But if he hadn't passed away, they could still have made this movie about the character passing away, and it would have been just as powerful. And so you don't want to mistake the memorialization of T'Challa for the memorialization of Chadwick Boseman when you consider that the memorialization that takes place in the film underpins it. Because at that point, you're robbing the character and the death of the character of the gravity that it has for his loved ones in the film, in the universe. And that would be unfortunate because it's the character's death that makes the story impactful. The fact that Chadwick Boseman died in real life is sort of a layer on top of that that engages the audience emotionally on behalf of the actors who are also grieving his loss and the crew and the fans who are also grieving his loss, but it doesn't constitute something that the film relies on to allow the audience to care about the characters. It's the death of the character that does that. And I bring this up because I read a critique where someone said, they needed to heavily memorialize Chadwick Boseman in this film through the death of T'Challa to have anything in the movie that anyone would care about. And that's just not true. Even if he hadn't died, they could still have written this story about T'Challa dying, and it would have been just as impactful. It has nothing to do with the fact that Chadwick Boseman also died. And when I say it has nothing to do with it, I mean it being the impactfulness of the emotional stuff that happens in this film. So, anyway, that's my review of Wakanda Forever. Really liked it. I recommend you go out and see it. I'll be back with another film review soon. Until then, I wish you peace and long life.